Hey guys, how is everybody doing? With Indiana Jones Dial of Destiny coming out this Friday, I have decided to review all the other four Indiana Jones films, starting off with the one that started it all, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. This is a very important franchise to me. Now, when I was younger, my grandma and my mom, they always told me about these movies and how I'd really like them. But I just never wanted to watch it because I was young and it was stupid. I'd be like, no, no new movies. Put on Friday 13th. Probably not Friday 13th, but every time they would talk about this movie, I'd be like, I don't want to watch it. But then one day, my grandma took me out to Walmart, and as grandmas do, they spoil you, and she bought me the four film collection. And I was like, I don't know if I want to watch this. But then I took this to my grandma's house when she used to live in Butte, and she got me to watch them, and I absolutely loved them. I watched the first two in the first day, but then I didn't watch the other ones until like a few more days, maybe a week. But I rewatched the first two movies like all the time. These two first movies are two of my favorite movies of all time. I adore both of the first movies. And I also remember that almost every time I would go visit my mom when she used to live here, I was like the movie guy, and every time I go spend the night or go hang out with somebody, they'd be like, "Hey, what movies are you gonna bring?" And when my mom would ask me, I would go, "I don't know. I'm probably gonna bring Indiana Jones." And after a while, she's like, "All right, let's do this. Let's watch it." But then after a while, every time I would go see her, she'd go, "No, you should probably bring something different." But thanks to my mom and grandma, these Indiana Jones movies hold a very special place in my heart. But with that out of the way, let's finally talk about Raiders of the Lost Ark. Starting off with my positives on Raiders of the Lost Ark is the main character himself, the man that makes this series so popular, is Indiana Jones himself. He is such a badass character. He is in like my top 10 favorite characters, movie characters of all time. I fucking love Harrison Ford in the portrayal of Indiana Jones. Like I said about Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford just as Indiana Jones, he's awesome in the role. Now, he had not had many roles at the time. He had really been only known for Star Wars as Han Solo, even though he doesn't like that character for some reason. But he got the role of Indiana Jones because he worked on Star Wars, which got him this role because he worked with George Lucas, who's been part of this franchise for a while and came up with the story along with Steven Spielberg. And Indiana Jones is such a badass character. He's like a teacher at like this college or high school, they don't really say. And then he's also just this guy that goes looks for treasure, and this takes place during the 30s and 40s, and they're trying to like find out a way to kind of like stop Hitler and the Nazis and all that, who has always been like the big bad guys in this entire franchise. But he's just a guy like nobody knows that he's like all these students don't know that he's like a treasure hunter. They just see him as just like an ordinary teacher. But then like even after the scene where all the kids leave his classroom, this one guy comes in and Indiana Jones is talking to him. It's like, I had the thing in my hand, I had it, and then they have to find another way. He's always just been known as like this lovable character. Like he's always been the character that you couldn't help but love, and you go and see him do all of these adventures. I love Indiana Jones. Like I said, he's one of my favorite movie characters of all time. Harrison Ford in the betrayal is awesome, and I'm so glad that he returned as the character. I just adore this character. Now that I think about it, he's really the only reason that I rewatched these movies on loop when I was a kid. I mean, he is the star of the show after all. We have to talk about that opening sequence to this movie. Just, yes. This entire opening sequence is iconic from beginning to end. Even when this movie opens, you don't know what's going on. You just see like a bunch of like travelers just walk through the forest. At first, you're like, huh, I wonder what's going on. And they're just walking around, and then they take out some darts out of a tree, and they see that the poison is still fresh, and you're like, poison? And then this one guy, he pulls out a gun and points it at Indy, and he kind of like thinks about betraying him. But then all of a sudden, he just pulls out a fucking whip and just whips it out of his hands, and then he just scares him off, and you finally get to see him. And like after that, he comes like out of the shadows because you don't get to see him for like like 5 minutes maybe. And then you see him, you're like, that's the guy we're gonna be seeing throughout this entire movie? Fuck yeah, man. But then he even goes a little further where they're slowly going through the cave and then they got spiders all over them. They finally get to the scene where they're about to grab the crystal, and especially that whole scene where Indy's just like memorizing and go, hmm. And he takes out the little sand or dirt, whatever the fuck it was, and he starts feeling it. And he's trying to kind of calculate the same way, and he starts pulling out dirt, and then he does like the iconic scene where he has the bag of sand in his one hand ready to grab the thing, and then he just grabs them and switches them. But then all of a sudden, hell just breaks loose. Everything starts to collapse, and then the one guy that survived and decided to go along with him just betrays him, and he drops the whip that they used to swing across. And then you get to the scene where he gets the crystal thing back, and then you get that whole iconic scene that everybody knows this franchise for, and that's the giant rolling boulder, like where it starts rolling down and starts to go after him. That entire sequence of the opening of this movie, it just gives you a hint what you're about to see throughout this entire movie and throughout the rest of this franchise. That's probably one of my favorite movie openings of all time. I bet if you ask people, and when they ask like, what's probably the most iconic scene in Indiana Jones, I bet you a lot of people will say the rolling boulder in the opening of Raiders of the Lost Ark, or pulling out the heart in Temple of Doom. Ew. Of iconic, we have to talk about that iconic theme song to this entire franchise. Dun 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 dun. Get copyright strike for that. I absolutely love that theme. Now, I don't know if this was a an accident or it was meant to happen. Since George Lucas worked on Star Wars, we all know the iconic theme to that. But the theme here also kind of for indie kind of sounds like it took notes from the Star Wars thing, which I don't mind. I love both of the themes. Now I don't know if that was intentional or maybe it was an accident. George Lucas. I love that thing, and when I was sitting in the theater when I was watching a movie, I'm not gonna say which movie. When I first saw the indie theme on my at my movie theater, because at the time I want to point this out. At the time, the trailer for the movie had not premiered everywhere, but it premiered at my theater. And then when I was sitting there, I was so excited. And then when I heard that thing, and I was like, "Fuck yeah, Indiana Jones is back!" I imagine almost every single Indiana Jones fans, when they heard that theme playing during the trailer for the new indie movie, I bet everyone just like fucking just had a flashback to their childhood when they heard that thing. They're like, man, this has got to be the best movie ever made. Which I don't understand how the new one is supposed to be one of the worst of the franchises. I refuse to believe it. But that indie theme, iconic from beginning to end. I love it. What else do you need? I just love it. Gotta talk about the action sequences in this movie. They're fucking awesome. Like I said with the rolling boulder and the opening of this movie, you got like the whole fight scene with Indy and this big like Nazi dude that just like punches the shit out of him. Every action scene in this movie is just iconic, especially with the scene where he's on the horse and then like they're kind of like driving away and he jumps on their cars and starts punching them and throwing them out. All the action sequences in this movie are awesome, and they just get you thrilled up. Like every time Indy's like punching someone or like starting to get the wind over, you're like, "Fuck yeah, get him, Indy!" But then when he gets kidnapped, you're like, "Fuck." Action sequences of this movie are awesome. Basically, I just love them. I just love everything about this movie. It's fucking awesome. I haven't. I probably said the word "I love it" like a lot. Here's a challenge for you. Go restart this video and take a shot every time I say I love it. You'll probably end up in the hospital. So probably don't do that. I really like the side characters in this movie. You got the love interest played by Carrie Allen. You got the villains, which I don't think are the best in the world, but I still like them, especially their fatality. Where I like the main villain, where at the opening of the movie, where he takes the crystal skull from him, and he's just like, "I've always been. Every time you steal something in me, it just somehow becomes mine." I like that villain. I think is a very interesting one. But I will agree with some people that the villains in this movie aren't very memorable and they're not, and you don't find them all intimidating. But I've always liked the villains because, like that one guy that gets his face melted at the end of the movie, he's always been a villain that I've always enjoyed. Even when I was younger, I always thought he was pretty cool, especially with his voice and all that. We're not thirsty. And then when he, oh Jesus, and even when he burns his hand with the medallion that they're looking for, like when Karen Allen's character in this movie, like after she drops it by the fireplace, and that's what they're all fighting for, he picks up and it burns his hand. He goes, ah! I think these side characters are likable. I like the love interest. I think the villains are interesting, and especially like some of Indiana Jones's friends in this movie, like when he goes there to look for something, and then the one guy who's returning in the new movie, and like who catches like that one thing that Indy was about to throw in his food, but then like throw in his mouth and sees the monkey ate something. He's like, bad rights. I like him too. All these side characters are interesting and likable. I don't know if this is much of a positive, but this is something that I've always praised. Now, I've probably never seen a most referenced movie in my life. This movie has probably the most iconic movie scenes ever put on cinema. And that is a huge compliment because if you watch adult cartoons like I do, Family Guy, Simpsons, South Park, those three adult animations reference this movie a lot, especially Family Guy. Seth MacFarlane grew up with with this movie, and he referenced it a lot in his in few episodes of Family Guy. You if you binge the show, you probably will notice them. I've always noticed them. Like especially like when they're running away from all the people, like in the opening of this movie, and like when the Indians accidentally kill Meg and all that. This is probably the most referenced movie I've ever seen. Especially watching Family Guy, they reference every iconic scene in this movie. I don't know why, but I don't know if just because this movie is so great, maybe because it has so many iconic scenes, but I've never seen a more referenced movie ever in my life. And that's a huge fucking compliment, man. For my final positive, I think the effects in this movie still hold up. Like I mentioned with the villain, like when the guy, like after they finally get the thing that they've been all fighting for, and then when they look, and then like Indiana, like realizes it's not a good thing to have and all that, and then when they activate it, almost every Nazi that's in this room just like fucking just like it's like a hole through their chest and dies, and then this one guy's face melts, and then this one guy's like face like shrinks till he's dead, and then the other guy's head just like fucking explodes like pew. Why did my voice just stop there? Pew pew. But sure, I do agree that this movie should not be PG, especially looking at like some movies now. Well, you got to keep in mind the PG-13 rating did not exist until like another like 5 to 3 years. Yeah, like 5 years at this point, because after the two Indiana Jones movies and Gremlins, both involving Steven Spielberg, well, all three involving Steven Spielberg, like the MPAA almost gave those movies R ratings, and especially since parents have been complained Karens, and so Steven Spielberg talked to the MPAA and inventing PG-13 because the only ratings at the time were PG. Well, actually, there was G, PG, R, and X, which X turned is now NC-17 now. But I do agree with that. That some of the violence in this movie with the effects should not do not fucking end well for its time. But I've always loved the effects. They've never really scared me since I grew up with horror movies. Maybe you kids should stop being such pansies. Pansies. I like the effects. They're fun. It's a movie, and Steven Spielberg has always been known for great effects. Jurassic Park. Oz. Private Ryan. Oh, excuse me, I keep sneezing. All in all, guys, I have no problems with this movie. The only thing that I already said, was like some of the effects in this movie will not hold up today, especially with some movies coming out and like with all these different ratings now. I've always loved this movie. This is a movie that I grew up watching. It's a movie that I've always loved. It's a movie that I constantly rewatch. It's one. This is in my top. 50 favorite movies of all time. I adore this movie, and if you have not watched this movie, what are you doing with your time? It's on Disney Plus now. You have no excuse not to watch it. But if you don't have Disney Plus, then go out and buy it. What do you guys think of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark? Do you love this movie like me? Or you, for some reason, don't like this franchise or don't like this movie? Let me know in the comments below what you think about this movie, and we will talk about it. And if you like this video, like it. If you loved it, subscribe and hit the bell notification so you will get notified for my latest videos. But until my next review, take care.